Dakota Johnson returns to Valentine's Day weekend. You're watching Beyond the Trailers review of How to Be Single.
You're a pretty girl. This is New York City. There's like 1 billion people outside that door. Where to?
Home.
Hey! I'm serious! Alice, you're single now. You do not go home.
Just drive! Robin!
I want a one-night stand.
What about the guy over there?
No, he's too young.
I'm Ken.
Is this one of those fetish things where you're like a foot fetish? Am I the foot?
Do you want to be the foot?
Yes, last year, Dakota Johnson dominated Valentine's Day weekend with 50 Shades of Grey, which opened with a stunning $85 million and went on to make almost $600 million worldwide. Previously best known as Melanie Griffith and Don Johnson's daughter, Dakota was singled out by reviewers as the best part of the movie, with her surprisingly comedic performance as Anastasia Steele. She, in fact, is following in her mother's footsteps, who'd made a name for herself with her own risque role in Body Double before proving herself an adept comedian with Something Wild and Working Girl. So now Johnson, who has 2 more 50 Shades pictures to go, must try to build on that opportunity, and her first move out of the gate, after a small cameo in Black Mass, is starring in How to Be Single. And Johnson's 50 Shades success has gotten her top billing over her co-stars, who are formidable. Rebel Wilson is a key player in the Pitch Perfect movies and has hosted the MTV Movie Awards. Leslie Mann is Mrs. Judd Apatow and recently had her own hit movie with The Other Woman, while Alison Brie has a cult fan base thanks to strong turns on both Community and Mad Men. And behind the camera, Drew Barrymore is producing, who back in the day probably would have taken Johnson's role. This is the era of female comedy, with Bridesmaids, Trainwreck, Spy, and of course, the just mentioned Pitch Perfect movies and The Other Woman. Made for just $30 million, How to Be Single doesn't have to be 50 Shades of Grey or even The Hangover to be considered a solid performer, but the latter isn't out of the question either. An R-rated comedy about being single coming out on Valentine's Day weekend is a pretty solid bet. Valentine's Day, the movie, managed to make over $200 million worldwide, while He's Just Not That Into You did similarly big business. But then again, both those movies were rated PG-13.
So as they make more and more female comedies, it becomes just like any other genre. There are hits, there are misses, and there are solid middle-of-the-road entries. And How to Be Single is that last one. I had a good time watching it, and I genuinely laughed out loud several times. I also really appreciated the modern depiction of today's single scene, not just from the perspective of women, but also the guys who are in play as well. I felt it was a very fair movie. But to be fair, in my review of the film, I have to add that it is probably one of the most chick flickiest movies I've ever seen. And I think that really only female audience members will be able to relate to it and laugh out loud to it, while the guys who go have a pleasant experience. Now, I don't really know why I put that in quotation marks. I think that the movie genuinely is pleasant, and I think guys would not be tortured sitting through it. But I think that they would maybe sometimes get suspicious when the women that they're with maybe laugh a little too loud at some of the jokes. So maybe you want to go for that reason to kind of get some inside information. Something else that the movie has going for it is that it has colorblind casting with Damon Wayans Jr. And I was really surprised they didn't play that up more in the ad campaign for the film, because this is a very competitive movie-going weekend with Deadpool and Zoolander 2. And I think to a decent number of people, that would have made them more interested in seeing this movie in theaters. And Damon Wayans Jr. Does a very good job, and he's in a role that's totally colorblind, and it was very nice and refreshing to see. Also, something else I enjoyed about the movie is that it allowed me to play one of my favorite games as a New Yorker, and that's Spot the Location, and how it's not actually where the movie says it is. And you guys just went around the block. You didn't go cross town. So it's fun to kind of catch the movie in a lie, but it's also fun to try and piece together how they shot the film. Like, oh, you only had a permit for those city blocks? Oh, hilarious. Or that building doesn't actually exist. Oh, so funny. So that's a special pleasure for this movie with people who are familiar with New York, because a lot of movies shoot in New York, but this one was very obvious with its locations, like where they were. So again, I guess you could say it was fun to play Spot the Location. Now, as for the rest rest of the cast, I thought that Dakota Johnson continues to be, as I said in the open, and I agreed with the praise for her in 50 Shades of Grey, she is not only a good comedian, but she's a very natural actress. She's a lot like Melanie Griffith. They don't look very much alike, but I think they have a very similar vibe. So I liked her quite a bit. I thought she did a very nice job. As for everybody else, though, they just kind of did their thing. Like Rebel Wilson, totally Rebel Wilson. Leslie Mann, just Leslie Mann. Although she has been revolutionary. I much preferred her in The Other Woman. I thought she was very good there. She stole that movie from Cameron Diaz and, well, to some degree, Kate Upton. Kate Upton doesn't put up much of a fight. But here, Leslie Mann was more of a team player. Alison Brie, also very good, had a very good, funny monologue in the movie, but she had the smallest part. So if you're an Alison Brie fan, you might be, if that's the only reason you're going, you might be slightly disappointed. Then as for the guys, as I said, Wayans Jr. was very good. I think that Jake Lacey is becoming the cheap Chris Pratt, so it's interesting that that's becoming a category, and he makes a very good cheap Chris Pratt, actually. And then Anders Holm, what I thought was the most interesting about him is that I appreciated the realistic portrayal of his half hot guy, half dad bod physique. I think which is actually more representative of what's out there in the field than sometimes what movie like Hollywood likes to, put out there. So I thought that was really nice, and I think something that men would also appreciate while watching the movie. I thought he was very realistic. All the guys in this movie, again, very realistic, very likable, very relatable. Also, one other thing I wanted to say, though, is that the casting of Dakota Johnson's love interest, or one of them, her high school or college boyfriend, it was a little freaking me out because they looked like brother and sister. I was like, you guys look the same. Why are you cast as love interests with each other? This is kind of creepy. But anyway, so my overall thoughts on the movie are, if you think that you would like How to Be Single, I think that you will like How to Be Single. It is exactly what it says it is, and it delivers exactly what it promises. It doesn't go beyond, but it doesn't fall short. And if you don't see it in theaters, I think it would be a great Valentine's Day weekend movie. But I think that it would also be a wonderful rental down the line, either like on the airplane to stream, or just if you're, sitting down at night and you're like, what should I watch tonight? This is, I think, going to be a very strong performer on streaming when it hits, iTunes. All right, so that's my review of How to Be Single. If you've seen the film, please leave your thoughts down below. If you're not seeing the film, please leave your thoughts down below as to why not. And then, of course, as always, thank you for tuning in, and you can check out some other episodes right now.